Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and we are so thrilled that you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 15, going on 16 novels of suspense. My current novel is One Wrong Word, which you see on the door behind me. And my upcoming book is called All This Could Be Yours, which comes out September the 9th, and you will hear a lot about that when the time comes. But today I want to focus on this absolutely incredible new book, which is out today, The Mother Next Door by Andrea Dunlop. It's narrative nonfiction, and it really had me in the mind of In Cold Blood as I read it. It's breathtakingly suspenseful and truly heartbreaking, absolutely riveting and a page turner. If I say it will change your life, and I know that sounds sort of hyperbolic, but it's true. And I want to hear from Andrea about that in a minute. It must have been so tough to write this and so powerful for you. But today is pub day for you and your co-author, Mike Weber. And you were just saying that you had just been on television today. What is your pub day like today? Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for all those cold words. Thank you for all those kind words. To be compared to In Cold Blood is really that means a lot to me. Truman Capote is one of my favorite authors, and in fact, In Cold Blood is the only book of his that I have not read because I actually, believe it or not, am incredibly sensitive and kind of easily spooked. I listen to some true crime, but usually not like stuff that's super gory. I'm a big chicken when it comes to horror films. So I think this turn in my career of being really full time on the true crime beat is a surprising one. And I think that is though what happens when you find something that really gives you a sense of purpose. And I think that's also what I have in common with my co-author, Detective Mike Weber, who really found a sense of purpose around investigating this abuse and trying to bring this to light. And so I think we're both just really proud of the book and really happy that people are excited about it. I'm sort of overwhelmed by the amount of support we've gotten for this book so far. This is my fifth book birthday. I've had 4 novels previous to this, but everyone is very different, and this certainly feels different for a lot of reasons.
Well, it's incredibly powerful and absolutely riveting. And you have brought so many people to hear from you today. Susie Baldwin is here, and Renee is here, and Shannon Hansen. Deborah Press is here, Kathy Lanigan. This is so nice to see all of you. Welcome. I just love when you all come. And this is quite a spectacular book. I cannot wait to tell you all about it. Let me tell you quickly that if you are new to A Mighty Blaze, you know that, and we're so glad that you're here if you're new. That is fantastic. You picked a really good day to be here. Mighty Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic by the powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us discovering new books and keeping the writing community together and keep us sharing and talking and being together when we couldn't be together in real life. And now we have persevered and been here for 5 whole years, which is kind of amazing. And I am just honored to be able to share The Mother Next Door by Andrea Dunlop and Mike Weber with you today. It is, as I said, a life-changing book. And I'm now going to tell you about Andrea Dunlop, and then I will stop talking. I know you're saying, let her talk, Hank, let her talk. I promise I will in a minute.
It's okay. I talk plenty. I talk for a living. I'm happy to sit back for a moment.
In a minute. Andrea Dunlop is the author of 4 novels, including She Regrets Nothing and Women Are the Fiercest Creatures, and the host and creator of Nobody Should Believe Me, an award-winning investigative true crime podcast about Munchausen by Proxy. Andrea is the founder of Munchausen Support, the nation's only nonprofit dedicated to supporting survivors and families affected by MBP, and a member of the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children's MBP Committee, where she serves alongside the country's foremost experts. She lives in Seattle with her husband and 2 children. And we'll talk about Mike in a minute. I want you to talk about Mike since you are so connected with him. But for the people who have just arrived, Randy T says, sounds amazing. Brenda Gaskell says, happy pub day. Oh, Renee is asking a great question, and we will get to the question you're asking in a minute. Anyway, tell us, Andrea, tell us about The Mother Next Door, and we will go from there.
Yeah, so you were mentioning how A Mighty Blaze is a pandemic era project. This is my pandemic era project. I actually met Detective Mike Weber at the APSAC, which is the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. I went to their annual conference 5 years ago, which was after my novel, We Came Here to Forget, came out. And that was sort of my first foray into talking at all publicly about the situation in my family. That is what led me to cover this form of abuse. And through that, I met a wonderful expert, Dr. Mark Feldman, who is very well known on this abuse. He is a psychiatrist, a professor of psychiatry. He's also written several books on the topic. So he and I met through a journalist that had interviewed both of us. And he said, I really think you should come meet with this APSAC committee. I think you'd make a great part of the committee. And I went down and met with these folks. It was the first time I had ever talked to people who had any knowledge about this abuse and who for whom my story was not just sort of shocking, that they were like, oh yeah, I mean, I told them I told the group my personal story, and they were just like, oh yeah, oh yep, sort of. And I that was so shocking, because every time I had attempted to tell anyone the story before, they were just shocked and confused and upset, and so that was really life changing for me. And then I went to an all day training that for it's multidisciplinary. Everybody, at this conference works in some area having to do with child abuse, but it's, doctors, law enforcement, social workers, all different kinds of folks. And I listened to Mike Weber present with Sheriff Bill Wayburn, who is his former boss. Actually, Mike just retired last week. So they presented about actually the second case in the book, the Brittany Phillips case. Sheriff Wayburn is not only Mike's boss and the sheriff of Tarrant County, but he is also the adoptive father of a survivor of this abuse, Alyssa Wayburn. And as I was listening to the two of them tell this story, it was like every light in my brain went off, and I thought, oh, this is what I can do to help. Like, this is how I can sort of be a part of moving this cause forward of awareness about this abuse, and hopefully better, systems and solutions for this abuse, is as a storyteller, right? That's what I'm trained in. That's what I know how to do. And so that I was chatting with Weber after his presentation. I was like, that's a great presentation. I really appreciate you guys. And he said, oh, you're an author. Oh, people are always telling me that I should write a book. And I was like, no, you should write a book. And Hank, I'm sure you have the same experience, right? When you work in book publishing, like, everyone wants to tell you about their book ideas and everyone thinks that they have a book in them. And a lot of times I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, And in his case, I was like, no, you're the law enforcement expert on this particular type of abuse that is never talked about. There are not very many books about Munchausen by proxy. There's, when we were putting together like our comp title list for the proposal, there's just a few, and a lot of them are sort of more academic.
Let's go back a minute, because I do want to have people understand what it is that this book is about, and rewinding a little bit even more to your personal story, which was the linchpin, the domino that got you into this. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I'll just start off by explaining what Munchausen by proxy is for those who don't know. So, it's a form of child abuse in which a parent or caregiver, usually a mother, like 96% of the time it's a mother, will exaggerate, feign, or induce illness in their child, and for the purposes of sympathy and attention. So this is something that has affected my family. My sister has never been charged with a crime. She's been investigated a couple of times. The first investigation that happened almost 14 years ago now, and that just totally blew my family apart. And I've been estranged from her ever since. And that was an experience that obviously really impacted me. And as I wrote about it as a novelist, and that was, I thought, going to be my project where I sort of dealt with it, and then it's turned into a really big part of my life. But so that's kind of, that was my entry point, was that situation in my family. And when we went through it, we were so isolated. We sort of thought, we feel like the only family this has ever happened to, like, on the face of the earth. I knew that couldn't be true, but this was also even a very different era for this abuse even than it is now, because this was pre the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case, which I think is a lot of people's entry point now. If they've heard of this abuse, then they're
Well,
like, oh, yes.
tell us about that case, if you will, briefly.
Yeah. So the Gypsy Rose Blanchard story, for the 5 people who don't know, but or maybe it just seems that ubiquitous in my world, probably so. But the Gypsy Rose Blanchard story is a story of a young woman who was victimized by her mother, a very sort of had a lot of the classic trappings of this abuse. So she was in a wheelchair when she didn't need to be. She had a lot of stuff around sort of her eating issues and had a feeding tube and like that kind of thing, which again, we just see in a lot of these cases. And no one ever actually even reported the abuse. And they spoke to some of her doctors after the fact who were like, yeah, I thought something was wrong when she stood up out of her wheelchair, but I just didn't know what to do about it, which is preposterous. Definitely it highlights how much more education we need on this on all fronts. But this story took a very dramatic turn when Gypsy Rose connected with a boyfriend online and then conspired to murder her mother. And so that was when the case blew up. And so they were caught, and Gypsy Rose Blanchard did, I think, 7 years of a 10-year sentence in prison, and then the boyfriend is still in prison. So that is obviously a very complicated case, right? Because you have this very sort of salacious thing about the boyfriend and the murder. And I think that story really highlights all of the failings about this abuse, because nobody who was looking at this situation knew what to do about it. Her father was very young. Gypsy Rose Blanchard's father, who she has a close relationship with now, Rod Blanchard, was very he was very young when Gypsy was born. I think he was 18 or 19, and just thought his daughter was really sick and didn't really have a relationship with Dee Dee.
Well, I want to interrupt you, because that's not what I mean.
Yes,
this isn't about that. And what your book is about is so incredibly important. Some case studies of several situations like this. And in the bigger picture, in the forward of the book, you say, open your eyes. You ask us as readers and people and human beings to open our eyes to this. And I wonder why you said that. Why is this sort of a call to action for people?
Yeah, thank you. Because right now it's something that we are not recognizing is a problem, right? I think I realized really quickly as I got into this that like step one is getting people to understand that this exists and that it's far more common than what most people think. Most of the time when this is described in the media, it's described as extremely rare. And the data does not bear that out. That data that we do have, and certainly when you talk to professionals who work in this arena, which I've interviewed most of the top experts in the world on this form of abuse, none of them feel like it is rare, and it is exacerbated by things like social media and people being able to Google every disease and every symptom under the sun. And I think it's something that people really, really don't want to look at, right? It's something that is so viscerally horrifying, the idea that a mother would intentionally harm their child. And that's a huge stumbling block to being able to protect kids from it. Because if you can't even look at it, then you certainly can't do anything about it.
And it's difficult for someone to ask a question about when they feel that something is wrong, or they get a sense that something is wrong. And if you could turn your mic up a tiny little bit, people are asking that you're a tiny little bit higher. That would be
absolutely. Is that better?
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. There you go, Kathy. It's a difficult thing to broach to someone, for a person or even a doctor to step in. Why does it continue? Is that one of the reasons? And not only why it continues, but how does it start with someone?
Yeah. So usually what we know about, the biggest thing to keep in mind is that this abuse is characterized by intentional deception, right? So this is not a mother who really thinks her child is sick. She knows that she's doing these things. They are completely aware of their actions, and they are legally culpable for those actions. So it's also not someone that is having delusions, right? You do sometimes see inappropriate medical care for other reasons, right? A parent being really, really anxious, or a parent having, postpartum psychosis or suffering from delusions or something like that. They are very easy to distinguish what is this and what is not that. And so it's like that intentional deception is really a huge piece of it. And when you talk about sort of the type of perpetrator, what goes on, what the sort of common thread with people who do this is that deception, right? So you see that deception is so pervasive, it is so intense, and it is usually in every part of their lives, right? So the abuse is very much characterized by the medical piece, but it also extends into, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, and just they lie about everything all the time. So we see a lot of lies about, their qualifications at work, fake nursing degrees, fake PhDs, lying about their own health stuff. That's pretty common with perpetrators. That was with, the case with my sister, and was the case with a couple of the perpetrators we cover in the book, that they had a long history of having, cancer hoaxes and just always sort of being in some kind of crisis. So I think it does make it very difficult, and our system is just in no way set up to deal with this abuse. For doctors, it can be very hard to, number one, right now in the current climate, they are extremely disincentivized to report, because a number of doctors that have reported, including the one who reported my sister and I believe really strongly saved my niece's life with that intervention, was completely raked over the coals in the press for separating families and for taking kids away. And so doctors are really, and then the Kowalski case that we covered in season 3 of the show, which was this high profile case that was depicted completely inaccurately in that Netflix film Take Care of Maya. That was a huge court case where the father sued the hospital. He won in court. It's headed for appeals, but that is a huge threat to mandatory reporting protections.
It's interesting because you're talking about when a doctor sees a child as a patient, you would think you would notice this. You would notice that the mother reports that the child is frail or allergic to something or can't walk. And at some point, the doctor doesn't probe into that and ask more about that. I mean, we might say, how can this even happen?
Yeah, I think that's a common reaction, and I think it's kind of multi-pronged. So, first of all, I think we all have to sort of take a minute and think about what your interactions with doctors are actually like. And if you're a parent, or even just as a person going to the doctor for your own things, how long are you spending with a doctor? And what happens for the vast majority of health things, is they ask you, well, what symptoms are you having? How are you sleeping? How are you eating? And certainly, I have 2 little kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. This is all very fresh for me, especially right in the beginning with babies. And we usually see that this abuse starts while the mother is pregnant. A lot of times that, there are premature births. We believe strongly that that's caused by most perpetrators. The doctor's asking you questions, right? They're asking you questions. How is your baby feeding? How are they sleeping? What's going on with them developmentally? All of those things are parent reports, right? And pediatric caregivers in particular really depend on parent reports, especially with really young children. So if you're going to the doctor saying in your 15-minute appointment, the child spits up everything they eat. The child isn't eating. They're fussy. They're what have you. They're having seizures. They are, they're not gaining weight. They're having these issues with sleep apnea and with their breathing. And they choose things like this, right? They choose things where it's not some definitive blood test that you say yes or no, the person has this. They pick either things like, cystic fibrosis is one that's popped up a bunch of times where there is a test for it, but it's relatively easy to mess with because it's a sweat test that involves salt, right? That you can sort of you can mess with that test, or things that are induced by the perpetrators. So in some serious cases, they're either they're saying their child's having breathing issues, but they're actually smothering them.
Just to make sure that that we're clear, the mother knows that this isn't true.
Yes,
it's not like they're delusional.
Correct. No, they're not delusional, and that's a really important point, because although there is a mental disorder, factitious disorder imposed on another, that's in the DSM that is associated with this, it's not something where, first of all, it's not very treatable. There's only a couple of cases that I've talked to, even my most optimistic colleagues on that side, where they've been able to sort of successfully treat perpetrators. And even then, it's not something where someone should be alone with children, I think. So that's the really important thing to know about it. This is not something where you can give someone a parenting plan and send them to therapy and you're all good. No. It's an incredibly compulsive behavior, and it's a knowing behavior, right? And I think, again, when you sort of think about that, a lot of times, when they do forensic searches into people's Google history and that kind of thing, they're looking up symptoms, right? Again, that's at all of our fingertips. So they look up symptoms, they go and report these things to the doctor. So doctors, if they are doing those things on good faith, which the vast majority of them are, obviously pediatric professionals do not want to harm children, and they rely so much on parents to give them the right information. If a parent is lying to them, then they will, then a lot of times they will give a misdiagnosis. And then if a doctor starts to indicate that they might be on to the parent or not, they don't go along with like the surgery the parent wants. They go, let's wait, let's give it some more time. They try and kind of put a halt to this. And certainly if they report on the parent and the parent finds out, they'll just move on doctors, right? So the doctor shopping of like, you go to 5 different doctors and like you go and go and go until you get one that is not going to question you. And there are some doctors that don't believe, that don't understand this abuse or sort of don't even believe that it's real. So unfortunately, especially like, parents will pursue the one rare disease doctor to sort of go to that will give any child that walks through the door that diagnosis. So it's really complicated.
This is a series of examinations of several real life situations, patients, clients, and parents and children. And you have a really chilling insight into the specifics of what happened in each of those cases. You were talking about the cystic fibrosis sweat test and how when one doctor was suspicious of what happened and whether the child really had cystic fibrosis and wanted to give them the test. Talk a little bit about that scene. It was riveting. This is so realistically and carefully written. Can you talk about that scene in particular and what happened?
The specific case with the Hope Your Bar case? Yeah. So, so you had this child who her mother had been saying that she had cystic fibrosis, and she'd been saying she has an extremely aggressive form of it. So also, she's going to die really young. And again, this is so common in these cases where you get things that are, it's always the most rare, the most awful, the most, life impacting, and the child's going to die young narrative. And so she had been saying this about her young daughter. So she's, I think, 5 at the time of the investigation. And she had gotten positive sweat tests, right? So the way that they test there's also a genetic test, but the way that they test for cystic fibrosis most of the time is they put a monitor on the child's skin, and then they have the child run around to produce some sweat. And then for children that have cystic fibrosis, the salt content of their sweat will be much higher than for a child who doesn't, right? So that's the primary diagnostic test. So this mother had taken her child around and gotten that test, and there was like one that had basically sort of like broken the machine, or that it couldn't read it. And then there was one that was positive, and it was sort of this like Goldilocks and the 3 bears type thing with the sweat test. And basically, and she confessed to doing this in an interview, that she was tampering with the test. She was putting nasal spray, which has salt on it, under the patch of the skin so that it would read for having high salt content. And so then
describe how she tried to spirit the girl out of the room.
Yeah. So then when the investigation happened, one of the first things they do is have them bring the child back in so that they can get a test that is not being tampered with. And, Hope goes into the room, and she's, acting very strangely and acting very upset. And she says, well, can I just take, they put the monitor on her child, and she says, can I just go take her in the other room so that she can have so that she can have a meltdown? And they're like, well, no, you can't. Like, obviously the whole point of this is to monitor. And they say, no, you can't be alone with your child when the whole point of this is to monitor you. And so sure enough, that test came back clear. And again, I think another sort of hallmark of this, she was not, most parents, if you are told that your child does not have a life-threatening illness, you're relieved. And that was not Hope's reaction. Hope was upset. Hope burst into tears because she was caught, and she knew that she was caught.
And it is so chilling. The way you've written this is so much as a reporter, and so objective, but again, so empathetic and understanding. What was it like for you to sort of do that balance of, you're telling a very difficult, straightforward, nonfiction story about 3 different people and their situations, at least three different people and their situations. How did you, with your own personal knowledge and your own personal background and your passion about this, How did you make the book be so straightforward and objective and yet so powerful?
Yeah, well, first, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I think it is definitely a challenge, and it's really important to me to say where I have some skin in the game here because I think like nobody, the reality is no one writes without bias, no one writes completely objectively, and at the same time, writing nonfiction, you really owe it to everyone involved. And these people are all, family members and everyone else is still around. So you really owe it to those people to get it right. And I think the human stories are what's interesting about this. How this affects, again, like there's so much media coverage on this case that really just says all of the gory details about what happened to the child. I know this child endured this many, horrific surgeries and they were in the doctor's office this much and sort of focuses on that piece. And that's a tiny part of the story. And I think like really how it impacts everyone, including the perpetrators, is what's interesting and is what needs to be talked about.
And I never thought about this, and I knew about these kinds of situations, of course, but it wasn't until I read this book. We're talking about The Mother Next Door by Andrea Dunlop and Mike Weber, which is riveting and life-changing. I never really thought about the domino effect to the families, the people who have been raising money and having fundraising events and deciding that this poor child is going to die and making their life revolve around that, and the focus, and they tell their friends to donate money and then suddenly it's not true. Talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit. That was just so chilling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's for me, like that's kind of that's my entry point in, right? Because I've seen the impact that this has on families because I saw what it did to my family. And I think in Hope's case, the reason I was so drawn to that story is because her family, which I spent a lot of time with that with her father and her two siblings. I'm still in touch with them. And they were such kind people and they really loved Hope. And so they did all of this, to fundraise for her cancer. And she put them through, this alleged 8-year-long cancer battle and, 2 remissions. And they had these huge parties and they did this big fundraiser when they thought she told them all she was going to die. She told them she wasn't going to fight it anymore. She was going to go to hospice. She did go into hospice. That's when this whole thing came unraveled. But yeah, I've really seen like just how big of a blast zone this is. So obviously the most important and the most impacted are the children in the situation, right? And the first thing is we need to protect children, and children deserve to be safe in their homes. But beyond that, I mean, really, like no one who goes through one of these cases is ever the same, right? Because the gaslighting is so intense and the betrayal trauma is so intense. You're being pulled into a fake version of reality for years. And it really impacts your ability when you're, close with someone who does this, your ability to trust yourself, your ability to trust your instincts. You feel
such a powerful element of this because as human beings, our, instinct is to say, let me help. Oh, poor thing. What can I do? And to support someone. We are not instantly suspicious usually when something like this happens. I mean, as reporters, we are. But as human beings, we're not. And the idea that they take advantage of that, just like a basic con artist
has
to do a con job on people. And it's their family, and as you say, it's the orbit of their entire life. Can you talk about that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they are con artists, right? Like it's again with the sort of like really bringing it back to like deception is the deception is the abuse, right? It is the weapon of choice. And so even when, in these cases where there is, manipulating of tests and there's, induction of symptoms and that kind of stuff, which obviously is very serious, the deception is the thing that they are using to pull this all off. And so really everyone gets roped into it. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And I mean, putting these cases together, putting the stories of these cases together, it's a huge challenge. I do it on the show with every season that we do a new case. And I mean, it's a challenge that I enjoy. I know that sounds like a weird word considering what I'm doing, but it's very compelling work because you end up having to put together this like 1,000-piece puzzle, right? Because trying to unravel when people are
Yeah.
lying about everything, and that's why it was such a good fit to write this book with Mike, because he had these case files, right? So he had
Tell me about
so
Mike.
much information.
We're talking about The Mother Next Door by Andrea Dunlop, who worked with Mike Weber, and he's a very special person. Can you tell us a little bit about him and why this was that's so important to the book?
Yes. So Detective Mike Weber, yes, he just newly retired as of last week from his job at the Sheriff of Tarrant County's office. And yeah, I mean, he's an incredible guy. He's just really been such an advocate for kids. He's worked in, he was a detective for 40 years. He's worked in law enforcement for 40 years. He spent most of that time in crimes against children, so doing other kinds of, child sex abuse, child sort of physical child abuse, that kind of thing. And his first full investigation into this abuse was the Hope Ybarra case, which we cover in the book. And he has this great moment where he's talking to, his boss, and then he was working for the Tarrant County DA's office. And he said, these are really complicated. I think a lot of people are not going to want to take these on. If we get another one of these cases, let me know and I'll take it on. And she was like, well, yeah, we don't really have that many of them. So, but yeah. And then like, it was like weeks later that she came in and told him there was another case. And so, I think, yeah, he's done incredible work, and he just really, he's a very smart and thorough detective. And I think he's very dogged. I think, Mike and I have the same, I guess, sort of strange instincts to like want to dig into something that's this complicated and this upsetting and sort of third rail. But I think it's just one of those things where you don't realize until you're in it that you have a tolerance for it. And I was just talking to Mike about that this morning, and because he's here in Seattle with me to do an event. And I think like he didn't ever envision himself becoming like the Munchausen by proxy cop. I don't think that like that's something that he would have even thought was a thing. But he's just really been willing to take this on. And it's a rare person in any field that will be willing to take on this abuse, because it is really horrifying. The perpetrators mostly slip through the cracks. Again, this is underreported.
Do you think that they mostly
Yes.
slip through the cracks?
Yeah.
Is it for attention or for money?
Well, it's so there's a separate disorder where people do it just or primarily for money, right? So that's called malingering. So that's a separate it's a separate behavior, but they are intertwined, right? So if someone is just, for instance, if someone creates a fake cancer in themselves or a fake cancer in their child and goes on GoFundMe and just uses it to raise money, but they're not like really lying to people in their lives, and it's not this whole huge web of deception, then if the primary gain is either to sort of, or if someone's faking an illness so that they don't have to go to work or they get out of military service or some kind of tangible benefit like that, then that's what's called malingering. With Munchausen behaviors and Munchausen by proxy behaviors, although there is a lot of fraudulent fundraising that happens, they're believed to do it for an intrinsic motivation, right? They would do it even in the absence of that ability to fundraise, and it usually financially devastates people, because they are spending a lot of money on, as you can imagine, like insurance doesn't cover everything, and a lot of times they're not working, and so it's not purely for financial motives. But there are a lot of fraudulent GoFundMes, fraudulent Make-A-Wish trips, and I do think that the money and the fundraising probably is a piece of the of what people get out of it. But certainly, it's really more about getting that attention, getting that sympathy, having an emotional need met. It's a maladaptive, way of doing that, but it's mostly about that person getting their emotional needs met.
I mean, this is so fascinating. We could go on and on. We're talking about The Mother Next Door, a series of case studies about Munchausen by proxy situations. It is riveting. It is propulsive. It is written like a novel, but it is just unbelievably powerful to read. How do you, and then we'll get to some questions, because we have some really good questions, including about what people can do if they suspect that they see this. And I want to have this be sort of a call to action for us as well. How did it change you to write this? And how do you want us to feel after we read it?
Ooh, what a good question. I mean, in terms of like what writing this book, and, I was writing this book at the same time that I was launching the podcast, and really this has all been sort of like one many-pronged project. I think it's made me feel empowered. And I sort of hate using that word because I feel like it's co-opted for like a lot of like faux feminist marketing, but whatever. It made me feel like there was something I could do. And before that, the profound helplessness, because my sister is one of, again, I think this is the most likely outcome. I believe my sister is a perpetrator who has not been held accountable, despite several investigations, despite 4 hospitals reporting her, despite one of the most qualified child abuse pediatricians in the world doing the medical record review in her case and finding for abuse, right? Despite CPS's finding for abuse. And that made me feel profoundly helpless. And just that this sort of like, it's like your house is on fire and you're trying to convince the fire department that the house is on fire when they're standing there telling you that the house is not on fire. It's really maddening. And so I think being able to help tell these stories, to help tell them in a human way. And I will tell you, like, right before I got on this call, I got a text message from Alyssa Wayburn, who we talk about in the book, her mom, and she'd already listened to that. She got the audiobook and she listened to that part of the book. And she was like, this is exactly how I would have wanted this story to be told. And that, like, I could not get a better compliment. So really being able to do that and being able to connect with other people who've been through cases and other people like Mike who are really fighting hard for this abuse. It's like, if every detective were a Mike Weber, like, we would be a lot further along on this, right? If everyone was willing to take that on. And so I think it really has given me some hope, and it's just given me something to do. I mean, I think like having something to sort of fight for and having something that feels productive has been really, really healing for me. And in terms of what I want people to take away from it, I think I really just want people to accept that this is real and that it could happen to anyone, right? That's why we have the title The Mother Next Door. I think a lot of times when people look at these very scary sounding true crime stories, we like kind of keep it at an arm's distance, and we'd be like, well, that's like one person, that's 1 in a million. That's, the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. Like, that would never happen. That's such a salacious, that's a, family that's like this Southern Gothic sort of setup. And what I want people to understand is that this happens in all types of families. And there is no known correlation of like abusers who do this having a history of being abused themselves, right? I think we're always looking for some like easy answer where we can just say like, well, it's that thing. So as long as like I don't abuse my children, they won't grow up to be this or whatever. Like we look for all the reasons this could never happen to you. And that's not the case. And I just want people to look out for it. I really believe, and again, I know there's a lot of sort of stats out there about this that are very misleading, because they are talking about the number of cases that have been caught, prosecuted, that ended in convictions, which is a fraction of the cases that are actually happening. That people really, that idea that it's so rare that you're not going to need to know about it, I think is really common. I really strongly believe that certainly if you are a pediatric health professional or work in CPS or work in law enforcement, any of these jobs within the systems that deal with kids, if you work in dependency court or in CASA or something like that, you will see a case if you do that throughout your career. Furthermore, I think anybody who works with kids, right? If you are a coach, if you are a teacher, if you work in the administration at a school, like if you do that for decades, you will see a person who is victimized in this way. And so I just really want people to recognize that and to watch out for it.
Well, let me tell you all that this is a tough book to read, and we all know our own limitations of what kinds of things we're able to read. So tiny warning, but if this is something that is compelling to you, and it was, this is an incredibly powerful look and a brave look at a situation. As Andrea says, as I said in her foreword, she says, open your eyes. And if you're willing to do that, this is a life-changing thing. We have so many great questions, you all. And I want to see Kathy Lanigan's question next after Deborah's. When they get out of jail, are they forbidden to be around children like a predator?
Oh, if only. No. We don't have anything like a child sex abuse registry for these type of offenders. Even those that do have convictions, they often get either very light sentences or probation. They frequently get their kids back. The courts often don't move to terminate rights. So it is not taken seriously. We should look at them in the same category as child sex abusers, which I think that's a comparison Mike and I make all the time, because that is mostly men. That it also has disorder associated right with it in the DSM, pedophilic disorder. But we all understand that that's something that harms the child, and that probably someone who crosses that line is not a safe adult to be around children. I think we should look at this abuse the same way. We do not.
Very interesting. Thank you, Deborah, for that question. Kathy Lanigan says, if someone suspects there's this type of abuse happening, what should they do? Is there a place to report it, or would you report it to the local police? What do we do?
Yeah, certainly. So, great question. So, the nonprofit that I founded, that several of my ABSAT colleagues work with me on, Munchausen support. We have a ton of information there, so that's a great place to start, just to get information about what this looks like, warning signs, how to report. We have lots of resources there, and we also have, you can get in touch if you have questions, or if you are concerned about something in your life, or if you are a survivor of this abuse or family member that needs help. So just put that out there. But yes, I mean, you should report it to, every state has an abuse hotline that you can report to, like a CPS, social services hotline. And you should report it to police. I think a lot of times people are concerned that you have to have some smoking gun. No, if you have a strong suspicion, then you should report that. And it is those entities' jobs to investigate that. And it's really important that we report, because oftentimes before anything happens about this abuse, and unfortunately this is true for all forms of child abuse, there have to be numerous reports from various people, and those all do get looked at, and they all get sort of added up, even if nothing happens because of that initial report. So super important.
And we'll put those sites and your podcast link on our chat, so people can find that very easily. And the people who are watching this, and I know so many of you will be watching it on video or on YouTube, you'll be able to find those links as well. Let's take one more question. I think we have so many in the chat, and maybe if you want to come back later and look at them. But Sharon Bishop is asking, how hard was it for you to do the research on this so sad and angering subject?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because, I've been doing this for the last 5 years, right? I've been really engaged with this topic and reading really everything. I've read all the books on it. I've read an absolute truckload of academic stuff on it, and then looked through a lot of case files. It was triggering in the beginning. It's still somewhat triggering if I'm looking at stuff related to my family's case, right? I have a ton of public records about that, and I still get new documentation all the time. So it's always a bit triggering with that stuff. But I found I've kind of developed a tolerance for it. And I think, it gets to me, right? I have to know my limits. I sort of feel like I can usually feel it in my body when I'm like, woohoo, you've spent too much time in the case files today to go take a walk. But I think because I think it's really counterbalanced by the fact that it feels like I can do something with it. It feels like I can bring it to light. It feels like I can help. And I think that has really been so empowering, that it doesn't sort of send me into this death spiral that it used to. So I've sort of developed a tolerance for it all the time. And again, like I said at the top, this is not where I expected to end up. This is not what I expected my career to be.
And we're so happy that I'm so honored to be able to talk with you today. Let me ask you one more question, because several people have asked this in the chat, and I want to make sure we hear the answer. Renee and Betty have asked, what happens to the kids when they grow up, the victims of this?
Yeah. So, most survivors are not permanently separated from their abusers. Most perpetrators, and that's part of why we know that most perpetrators are not held accountable. It's survivors end up in their 20s, sometimes in their 30s, 40s, beyond, where somehow like reality will break in, and not for all of them. Some of them stay really enmeshed with the perpetrator, and that's really sad on into adulthood. But for those who do kind of realize what's happened to them, they will go back, they will get their medical records, they'll find their CPS records, they'll say, or family members that were cut off from them will get back in touch. So somehow they discover that that they were victimized in this way. And it's a really long road back. And we have some resources for survivors. We have support groups for survivors through Munchausen support. So certainly we are really looking, the professionals on this side and on the APSAC side are really looking at how to better serve these communities, because it's really hard. I mean, again, like I actually think, the physical dangers are intense. There's a high death rate in this abuse. And I think the psychological damage that it does to people is the most long lasting. To have your parent who you, the person you're supposed to, and your mother, person you're supposed to trust above all else, betray you in this way and use you in this way is so damaging for people's ability to have relationships, to trust their own bodies when they were told they were sick their whole life and they don't, their sort of mind-body connection has been severed. So it's really a lot. And I think that's another reason I would really like to see the understanding increase, is because we are going to see most survivors are not going to be rescued in the way that some of the survivors in the book were. So I think that's really important.
I'm so sorry. I keep thinking, I wish we had so much more time, Andrea. You're absolutely brilliant, and I keep saying powerful, and I mean that. It's an honor to talk with you. Andrea's book with Mike Weber is The Mother Next Door, which is out today. It is a gripping and riveting read. It is a tough read, but worthwhile. You all know whether you should read this or not. I flew through the pages and have been changed as a result. So we will give away a copy of this book by spinning the wheel of fun. I know it sounds strange to spin the wheel to give away The Mother Next Door, but here we go with that, and we will see who wins this book, and we will send you that book. And the winner is Lori Hernandez. Lori, that is great. Email me and Margaret will put up the email for you. If you email me, and if this is not a book that you want to read, we will get you a different book and we'll pick a different winner. If you do want to read this, Andrea's publicist will send you your copy of The Mother Next Door. It is a life-changing book. Andrea, best of luck to you with the book.
Thank you.
I don't know if you say happy pub day, but grateful pub day, life-changing pub day. And you're very brave to write this book.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for everybody for tuning in. I appreciate all of you for listening today.
And we will be following you in your podcast. Before I let you all go, do not move from your chairs, or you can move. You have 10 minutes, because we have a special guest at a special time, a 5 p.m. crime time. We will welcome Andy Pliego for something completely different. This is a hilarious pastiche of the tropes of mystery. A group of writers is invited to an isolated mansion on an island, to play a murder mystery game, the host being a mysterious writer who has lured them to the island, and he has a purpose, and what kind of a book it is, because let me show you very, very quickly. At the beginning, in the beginning of the book is, come on, my fingers are not working at all. Well, you'll just have to tune in to see what is at the beginning of this book that will absolutely make you burst out laughing. And we need a little laughter after this very serious book. We've just been talking about The Mother Next Door by Andrea Dunlop, which comes out today. And in about 10 minutes, we will meet Andy Pliego and her hilarious You Are Fatally Invited. So you should probably stick around and go out laughing. Love to you all. Remember, it is always safe inside a book, and we will see you in about 10 minutes. Oh, if you can't stay for the 5 o'clock, I'm so sad about that, but come back at 4 p.m. next week and hear about A Long Time Gone by one of the favorites of Crime Time, Josh Moling. We love him, and this is a wonderful, solid, traditional mystery, and you will absolutely love this book and love Josh. Meanwhile, we will see you in 10 minutes for Andy Pliego and You Are Fatally Invited. And remember, until then, it is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time.